Have you ever taken on a project, or maybe you have a project that you should be doing, but you haven't done it because you don't know where to start, or because you just procrastinate? But I won't talk about that today. We'll just talk about the fact that sometimes we just don't get started because we don't know where to start. Don't you know it matters where you start? Right? It matters where you start. And if you don't know where to start, sometimes it's really hard to get started. Maybe you know what the end goal is supposed to be, but you don't know where to start or how to get there. Maybe you know how to do the middle part, but you skipped the first part, and that's just going to mess everything up. Any of you build Legos very often? Come on, Josh, put your hand back up. Thank you. Thank you, Eli. I know there's some other boys back there that are building Legos. If you skip the first page of instructions, how well does your build go? Terrible. Terrible. It matters where you start, and it matters how you start, doesn't it? If you start your day off bad, how's the rest of your day go? Terrible. If you get out of the wrong side of the bed, it's just a bad rest of the day. You have a bad attitude. You're angry at everybody for no reason. It matters how you start. It matters where you start. It matters how you start. And when we need to reset ourselves, when we find ourselves having gotten off track, or we find ourselves lost, where do we end up going? Back to where we started. The beginning really does matter. We've been talking a lot about Nehemiah, and we're in chapter 3, and in chapter 3, Nehemiah is about to actually get to work. The rubber's about to meet the road. Things are about to start happening. They're about to start building the wall. This burden and this passion that Nehemiah has been carrying for months, he's about to actually start getting his hands dirty and doing something about it. Now that is exciting for Nehemiah. Nehemiah gets into the city of Jerusalem. I love what Nehemiah does when he first gets there. He doesn't just jump right in and start telling people what to do. He hangs out in the city for a while. He walks around the wall. He looks at the gates. He goes and explores the city. He gets to know the territory. I like to think that he even gets to know the people. And it's a little while before he even begins to tell the people what it is that he feels like God has sent him there to do. And I think Nehemiah is doing that because he knows it matters how he starts. He knows it matters where he starts, and he knows it matters how he starts. So he needs to get to know. So the very first thing Nehemiah does is he listens. Sometimes the best thing that we could do as we go about doing the work that God has called us to do is to just be quiet and listen and hear what God has to say. Hear what the community has to say. Hear what the people have to say, and just listen. So Nehemiah does that. He listens for just a little while before he starts to get to work. But what I really want to start to talk about today is where Nehemiah decided to start working, or at least where he decided to report that he was working. So in Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 1, after Nehemiah has spent his time listening, getting to know the city, it says then, and I'm not going to say his name right, so I apologize. We're just going to call him Eli for short. Then Eliashib, Eli, the high priest, and the other priests started to rebuild at the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set up its doors, building the wall as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated, and the Tower of Hananel. So here it is, they start building the wall. And when I read through this, my first question was, why did they start at the sheep gate? Why not start somewhere else? Why start at a gate? If you were building a wall, would you start at the gate or would you start at some corner of the wall, right? Like, I have built some fence, not necessarily walls, but some fence in my time, and I've never really started at the gate. I ended at the gate because I knew where I was going to put a gate, but I never really started at the gate. I started somewhere else so that I had something sturdy to pull the fence on, a corner. But he started with the gate. Now, let me just take a minute and let's talk about this sheep gate. He started at the sheep gate. This was a significant gate within the walls of Jerusalem. And it wasn't just a significant gate during this period of time, but it was a significant gate for quite some time after that. The sheep gate is the entrance through which the animals were brought into the city for market and for sacrifice. So all of those prime animals that came into the city, especially the ones that were coming in for those burnt offerings and those sacrifices that were going to find their way to the temple, would come through the sheep gate. So I think in my mind, the sheep gate was probably pretty close to the temple. Now remember that the temple has already been rebuilt, but there hasn't been a wall or gates yet erected around the temple. So all they have is a temple, but they really don't have a solid way to access that temple. They don't really have a way to bring in their offerings and their sacrifices. So they have the temple. They kind of started at the end goal, right, of having a temple, but they've left out the beginning. They've left out that entrance, that sheep gate. So Nehemiah starts with building at this sheep gate, this significant gate for the people. Now, as you read through into the New Testament, the sheep gate really starts to take on some prominence because it was the sheep gate that Jesus would use to enter the city of Jerusalem. And it would have been the same gate he used to head to Golgotha to find his way to the cross. So the sheep gate is pretty significant. And if you remember in John chapter 5, there's this story about this lame man who was laying next to these pools of water. And as the story goes, there were people that would come to these places. There were sick people that would come to these pools of water, wait for the angel to come down and stir the water. They would get in the water and they would be healed. But this lame man wasn't able to get in the water and nobody would put him in the water. And so he was laying there for a long time. And then Jesus showed up and Jesus heals him. Do you know where that happened? I'll give you one guess. The sheep gate. It all happened at the sheep gate. So this sheep gate is a significant gate. It was a very important place for them to start. They would have known that. It was the priests who were in charge of the sheep gate. It was the priests who were in charge of the things at the temple. It was the priests who were leading the way. When I look at that picture and I think about it in that context, they weren't just rebuilding a wall at this point. They were finding their way back to God. They had gotten off track. They had been lost. They were all turned around. And the only way they knew to find their way back to where they needed to be was to go back where it started, back to the sheep gate, back to the place where they would find their sacrifices, they would find their offerings, and they would take those offerings and they would take those sacrifices to the temple where they could recommit themselves to the Lord. So they were getting back to their foundation, getting back to what mattered, getting back their focus, and finding their way back to what they knew they needed to be doing and who they knew they were. These were God's chosen people who had gotten way off track and lost. And so they were finding their way back to this sheep gate, finding their way back into a relationship with God. When we think about, and we've talked the last few Sundays about getting to work, engaging in the work that God has called us to do, doing the things in this life that are making kingdom-size impact for the glory of God. But the first thing we've got to do is find the sheep gate. Because the first work that we need to be about is making sure that we are in line with God, that we are in a right relationship with Him. And it's so easy to get off track. It's so easy to get lost. It's so easy to get broken. It's so easy to fail and end up a lot like the people in the city of Jerusalem, where we're now almost content or are content to live in our guilt, our brokenness, and our shame. Until somebody comes along and reminds us, do you know you were created for more? You know there's a better way. And we say, that's fantastic, but where do I start? And the priests and Nehemiah would say, well, let me show you to the sheep gate, because that's where we're going to start. Let me help you find your way back to the sheep gate. Let's find this sacrifice, and let's find our way back into the temple. This work that Nehemiah was about doing, it was about building a wall, but it was about more than that. And it all started with the Lord. It all started with God stirring this burden in Nehemiah's heart. It started with the Lord opening this door for Nehemiah to go to Jerusalem with the king's blessing and the king's resources. And Nehemiah knows, as he's spent time listening, it still has to be about God. It's not about Nehemiah. It's not about his success. It's not really even about the wall. It's all about following God's direction. And sometimes we've got to remind ourselves of that. It's impossible for us to do the work that God's called us to do, to live the life God's called us to live, or be the people that God's created us to be if we forget where we started, if we forget the sheep gate, if we forget where we're supposed to be coming from and where we're supposed to be going to. So the most important work that we need to start with is allowing God to rebuild a relationship with us, with Him. And Nehemiah and the people, that's what they're starting to do. They're starting to rebuild that relationship so that they can hear clearly from Him and get back to being the people that God called them out to be, His chosen people. And so for them, it started with the sheep gate. For them, it started with this sacrifice. And for us, it starts in a very similar way. For us, it starts with recognizing and accepting the sacrifice that Christ made for us on our behalf, right? That Jesus came and died on the cross for us, rose from the grave 3 days later. He is the sacrifice that we need to walk through that sheep gate, to find our way to the temple, to always find our way back to Him, and to focus and become the people that we need to be. And in John chapter 10, Jesus claims to be that very gate. So here Nehemiah is starting at the sheep gate, recommitting themselves to the Lord, finding their beginning again, so that they can start all over. And then in John chapter 10, Jesus says to them, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the true sheep did not listen to them. Yes, I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and will find good pastures. I love this picture. So in Nehemiah, when they're rebuilding themselves, it starts at the sheep gate. And now Jesus is saying, if you want to rebuild yourselves, it starts with me. I'm the gate. I'm the sheep gate. So before we can go about the work that God has for us, we need to first allow God to do a work in us. You can't do a work for Him if He hasn't done a work in you. And we need God to do works in us all the time. And we need to find ourselves confessing our sins, recommitting our lives, rebuilding a sheep gate, so to speak, and finding ourselves back on track with where He's called us to be. So just like with Nehemiah and the people of Jerusalem, it all starts at a gate. But we have Jesus as the gate. And so we stand at a gate and we decide whether we're going in or not. They stood at a gate and decided whether or not they were taking their sacrifice to the temple or not, or whether they were just going to go to the market. We stand at the gate and we decide, am I going in or am I staying out? Am I going to be about the things of God? Am I going to be about the work of God? Am I going to allow God to do a work in me? Or am I going to stay out here in my shame, in my brokenness, and in my lostness, and continue to wander around in my selfishness with no direction, no purpose? Or do we go through the gate where we find our purpose, where we find our direction, and we find redemption, and we can find our healing? And Jesus is that way for us. He's the way to have that relationship with the Father. He's the way to find that redemption. And when you look up and when you start to study the history of these sheep pens during Jesus' time, they came in various sizes, and some of them were larger than others. So some of them had a gate with a gatekeeper. And that gatekeeper would stand there and only let certain sheep or shepherds through the gate because he knew who they were. So not everybody could go in through the gate. Some of the gates, were small enough, some of the pins were small enough, where the gate was small enough, that the shepherd would actually lay down in front of the gate to protect the sheep from somebody entering that shouldn't be. So they would lay their lives down, literally on the ground, literally in front of the gate, so that nobody could come or go without their knowing, and nobody could come in that wasn't supposed to be. That's the image I think Jesus is painting for us, because he talks about how he laid his life down for us. Jesus is laying at the gate. He's laying at the very place you and I need to enter to start this life, to start this work, to allow him to do a work in us. He's laying at the very entrance to that place. And he's saying, you are welcome to come in, but you have to come in through me. You are welcome to come into this place and live this life and do this good work, but I'm the way you're going to get there. And I'm going to do a work in you first. And that can sound, almost like he's excluding people. But I think he's including everyone. And he's loving everyone. And he's saying, I'm asking you to come through me so that I can heal you, so that I can forgive you, so that I can change you. Not to kick you out, but to bring you in victory. And you get to come in and party with all the other sheep. So that's where this work is starting. Right there with Christ, right there at the sheep gate, where we say, I want in. And he says, great, come in and let me do a work in you. And it's a work we all know we desperately need, we desperately want, and it's a work we know we can't do ourselves, which is why we find ourselves standing at the sheep gate to begin with, because we've tried all these other things and all these other ideas and followed all these other people or things, and we're lost and we're broken, and we know we want better. We know we can do better. We know that God has better. But where do I start? It starts with Jesus. It starts right there at that sheep gate. This gate that Nehemiah and the people were beginning to build, it was the only gate that says they took some time to dedicate this gate or consecrate this gate. All the other gates, as you read through Nehemiah chapter 3, they were built, they had doors, they had locks, they put them all together, they put the wall up. But here in Nehemiah chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, it's the only place where it says they dedicated this gate in this portion of the wall. So not only was it a place where they were sacrificing to God and finding their way back to him, but now it's a place where they're recommitting or dedicating themselves. The word literally means sanctified. It literally means they set it apart. Now, I don't think they just set apart that gate or that section of the wall. I think they were dedicating their entire work to God. I think they were committing the entire city to the Lord. They were setting apart not only this gate and this wall, but the priests came together to commit themselves to the Lord, to set themselves apart to be used by God however God sees fit, to set apart this entire work for God however God was going to see fit. And it was no longer then just about building a wall or just about building a nice gate. Now it's, I am doing all of this for the Lord. And whatever the wall looks like, I'm just going to do it for God, and I'm going to let God figure out the rest. And I think that's why they were able to persevere through some of the toughest times. There were times when they were building this wall where they had a shovel in one hand and a sword in the other. And I know they kept going because it wasn't just about the wall, it was about God. They started in the right place. And because they started in the right place and they committed themselves to the work of the Lord, when tough times came, when temptation came, when trials came, they picked up a sword in one hand and kept going about the work with the other because they knew God was in it. And they weren't going to be stopped, slowed down, or scared away. They were doing this for the Lord. And we live in a world today where when we come through that gate, there are going to be people that are going to be trying to climb over the walls and get to us. It's not always going to be easy. Jesus told us that in this world we were going to have trouble. But he said, "Take heart, I have overcome the world." There are going to be times where we have to take up our swords. Paul talks about it in Ephesians. Like, we're going to have to engage in the battle. But when we commit ourselves to God, when we start in the right way, or we find our way back to the gate, we have the right foundation, we can push through the adversity. We can push through the trials and the temptation and the struggles, because you know what? Now it's all about Him and it's not about me. And so the people here in Jerusalem, they committed themselves, they consecrated the work they were doing in their very self to the Lord. They set themselves apart to be used by Him in building their city. For us, we're setting ourselves apart to be used by God to build His kingdom, to build up His body of believers in this place, to be this lighthouse in a dark world, to be the salt that we're supposed to be. Like, this is all about Him. And when we surrender ourselves to the Lord and we get to work, we can keep our focus because we know Jesus is laying at the gate. Jesus is protecting us. Jesus is watching out for us. And if we get hurt, if we fall, if we fail, if we wander outside of the gate, we know that Jesus is going to come looking for us. We know that Jesus is always going to be there to pick us up, brush us off, and welcome us back home. He's always going to be there to love us and forgive us because He's the shepherd. And He's laying His life down for us at the gate. So, folks, it matters where we start. It matters how we start. And if we find ourselves lost and wandering aimlessly in a world we don't understand anymore, well, then we got to get back to where we started. We got to find our way back to the sheep gate. And I can't help but think when Nehemiah and the people started building this wall, and they started building at the sheep gate, that there were some people wandering around that city going, I remember Grandma or Grandpa talking about that gate. I remember stories of people being healed at that gate. I remember stories of people being set free at that gate. I remember when what's his name brought in that sacrifice and found his way back to God. Like, I can't help but think that just the rebuilding of that gate brought new life to these people who were broken and living in shame. We need to find our way back to that sheep gate, back to where it all started with us, back to where we first entered into Christ and allowed Christ to come into us and change us. Because the world looks different, things look different, ministry looks different, life looks different, but the gate's the same. The sheep gate is the same. And let's make sure, church, that whatever work we embark on, we always make sure we're starting at the gate. And there might be some watching today or here in this building that, you know what? I'm standing at the gate. You're standing there and you know that you want to get to work for God, but you know what? He needs to do a work in you first. He needs to do a work of forgiving, a work of cleansing, a work of healing. He's there ready to do it for you today. So don't end the stream or close out the window or turn your phone off or start thinking about what you're eating for lunch before you allow God to do a work in you today. Let's all hang out at the sheep gate for just a minute. And let's allow Christ to do a work in us. And let's take a minute to commit ourselves to that work, to commit ourselves to God's work, to commit ourselves and set ourselves apart to be used by Him so that we can become all that God wants us to be. So I'm going to have Dan and the worship team come, and they're going to lead us in one more song. And the altars are always open. And I have found it extremely beneficial in my own personal life, and that's why I love having altars, is these are places where you can come, and this is a literal gate where you can come and spend some time with Christ and allow Him to do this work. If you're online, just get on your face before God today. We'd love the opportunity to pray with you, even if you are online. Just let us know, and we can pray. But as we sing this song, know that the altars are open. Know that Jesus is standing right there at the gate, ready to do a good work in you. Let's all find our way back to Him. Let's all find our way into Him so that we can rebuild a wall, so that we can get to work being the people that God's called us to be, so that we can get to work living in victory and transforming a city. Lord God, we come before you today just standing here at the gate. God, we want in. We want in. Some of us are carrying more baggage than others, and that's okay because you're there ready to take it. Some of us have been in and out for years. God, we're ready to come in and stay. God, right now at that gate, we commit ourselves to you. We surrender all of this to you. We're ready to make whatever sacrifices are necessary to become the holy people that you've called us to be. God, we trust and know beyond a shadow of a doubt that just as Paul said, that you are faithful and you are the one who called us, that you'll do it. So God, whether it be a work of salvation today or a work of sanctification, of fully cleansing us and changing us, Spirit of God, just have your way here today. Have your way in the homes, in the lives of the people that are online. Here we are. Amen.
In the morning, when I rise, in the morning, when I rise, in the morning, when I rise, give me Jesus, give me Jesus. When I am alone, when I am alone, oh, when I am alone, just give me Jesus, give me Jesus. Come to die, and when I come to die, oh, when I come to die, just give me Jesus. Come on, give me Jesus, and give me Jesus, you can have all this world. Just give me Jesus. Give me Jesus.